thanks again for coming out. This is a part of our Meet the Master series. Today's guest is Dom Flemons. Meet the Masters are a series of artist interviews in front of a live audience. That's you guys. The interviews are conducted by our festival intern, David Misal, over here. Hi, Dave. An American Studies doctoral student at Penn State. The Meet the Masters program is intended to give audiences the opportunity to learn about the lives and music of celebrated folk masters. And that means Dom. Just briefly, Dom Flemons is known as the American songster since his repertoire of music covers nearly 100 years of American folklore ballads and tunes. Flemons co-founded the Carolina Chocolate Drops, who won a Grammy for Best Traditional Folk in 2010. Since leaving the group to pursue a solo career, he recorded recently the CD Black Cowboys, which has been nominated for a 2019 Grammy. Flemons is an expert player on the banjo, fife, guitar, harmonica, percussion, quills, and rhythm bones, and I think a bunch of other instruments as well. He has performed with leading musicians such as Mike Seeger, Joe Thompson, Martin Simpson, Boo Hanks, Taj Mahal, the Old Crow Medicine Show, and Guy Davis. Let's give a warm Susquehanna Folk welcome to Dom Flemons.
All right, well, it is great to have you here. And we're just going to jump in and start talking just a little bit about some of his work and some of the music that he's been making over the years. But it's all got to start someplace, right? So can you tell us a little bit about how you got started, where your passion for these more traditional folk forms, comes from?
Well, it came in a few different steps for me. Well, first, I started out playing drums in school, so I played percussion, light percussion of every different sort in the concert band. And then as I got to be about 15 or 16 years old, on PBS they had a documentary called The History of Rock and Roll. And one of the episodes, amongst everything else, I got into Chuck Berry and Fats Domino and stuff, but one of the episodes was called Plugging In, and it was about the 60s folk music revival and how that evolved into the Monterey Pop Festival is kind of the narrative they go for that one. But that got me deep into the music of Bob Dylan, of Phil Oakes, Lightning Hopkins, and all these different people that were part of the scene in New York, as well as in Club 47, and also over here, Newport, Philly Folk Fest, and everything. So as a listener, I started learning the music just from listening to records like anybody else. But then as I got into college, I started getting deeper into the source recordings that even the people in the 60s were getting into. So then I became aware of a lot of the Library of Congress recordings, as well as recordings that were from the 20s, as well as the 40s into the 60s, then going into the 70s and 80s. By then, because there were a whole bunch of records that people had put out since. So I got a really broad view of folk music until I went to North Carolina for the Black Banjo Gathering in 2005.
Okay. So, from that point in 2005 until now, you've obviously done a lot of different kinds of work. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of, transition from the chocolate drops and such, to where you are now?
Oh yeah, sure. From the very beginning, when I started to, well, see, the thing that made me decide to become a professional musician compared to just being a musician who really liked the music was that I found that there was a chance to expand the scholarship of the music. And when I went to the Black Banjo Gathering in Appalachian State University, which was one of the first events bringing together the Black and African roots of the banjo, I was blown away by how much information there was, but I was also blown away by how much information had not been cross-referenced to create a bigger story out of the information that was already available, let alone new information that was being discovered at the time. And so I found that there was a lot of value and there was a need for people to connect the dots, create context, and to be able to present that on stage. Because I happened to be fortunate, like I saw Dave Van Ronk when I was about 18 years old in Phoenix, right before he passed away. I saw him in 2001. And I just love the way that he incorporated not only historical facts, but personal anecdotes and stories that are interesting stories, not necessarily all historical facts. And that was something that Dave Van Ronk did very well, and I incorporate that into my show even before I went out to North Carolina and started the Chocolate Drop. So that was always a part of my program from the very beginning. So when I started the group with Rhiannon Giddens and Justin Robinson, I just brought that idea into the group and just forced that to be in there, like, you know, especially when we were talking about African American string bands and that being underrepresented. I don't want to say it was non-existent, but it was definitely underrepresented in the big scheme of folk music traditions. And so for me, it was all about telling a little bit about the story, tell a little bit about why you haven't heard about it, and then connect people with something that they have heard of. You know, like when you learn about black string bands and you find out that Muddy Waters was part of a string band when he first recorded for Alan Lomax, and that the fiddler that led the string band was the same fiddler that played with Charlie Patton on his 1920s recordings. All of a sudden you've created this timeline that really shifts the ideas of what genres are supposed to mean and what people are doing with their music outside of the recording studio. So it kind of was a twofold. There's my personal artistic message that I put out with my music, and I put it together as such. But then there's a second part, which is telling those stories and being able to spread that information that's out there for other people to interpret, because that's what it's all about.
Well, and one of those blending of genres and, you know, things that oftentimes are just underrepresented would be the black cowboy, and that's something that we just heard. You know, album is up for a Grammy. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because if you're anything like I am, a black cowboy is not the first thing that you picture when you think of a cowboy. That's not where my head went when I first heard about this. And so it was something that I thought was really interesting. If you could share something about that, you know.
Well, absolutely. It was about 10 years ago that I became even aware of that myself. Even being from Arizona, it's not taught that black cowboys were a prominent or prevalent part of the building of the Southwest. And, you know, even though I had a lot of stories that were within my family that were stories about migration, like I'm sixth generation native of Phoenix on my mom's side, which is Mexican, but when you go back one or two generations, they're half German and half Italian and Irish and Mexican, going back 3 and 4 generations. That's on my mom's side. And then my grandfather, who was my mom's stepfather, was a middle-class black man, and his extended family included Tuskegee Airmen and people like that, and Pullman Porters and things. And on my dad's side, he was from Flagstaff, Arizona, which was a lot more rural than Phoenix. And then his parents came out from eastern Texas and Little Rock, Arkansas, and then came out to northern Arizona, where my grandfather was a preacher and a sawmill worker. So internally, I had these stories of westward migration in my family, but that wasn't connected to cowboys necessarily. But I came across a book called The Negro Cowboys, which was published in the mid-1960s, that talked about how 1 in 4 cowboys who helped settle the West were African-American cowboys, and that got me started. So that book gave me a lot of historical information to work with. The musical half started when I came across a record on Rounder Records from the Deep River Song collections from the Alan Lomax collection called Black Texicans, which Alan Lomax writes in the notes that the field recordings featured in there are probably the only recordings of black cowboys from a bigger black cowboy song tradition that might exist, because his father's work was built around black cowboys singing, and then he developed his book Frontier Ballads and Cowboy Songs and Frontier Ballads off of a lot of things he found from black cowboys. So it was sort of multifaceted when it came to what got me started. And then once I put the idea into formation, I went about it 4 ways, but I can explain that in a different breath.
I like him. He would be a good professor. You've got the same thoughts I do that way. So now, if you want to take a breath and take a quick drink, that's fine. I was going to ask you then, you know, I'd love the audience to get a chance to hear something, you know, sort of from that genre, from what you're doing there to reconstruct that tradition and to preserve it and to move it forward. Mm-hmm. So
Well, growing up in Phoenix, I went to the folk festivals that were in Phoenix, Flagstaff, and Prescott for many, many years. Prescott is where there's a song, Tying Knots in the Devil's Tail, that's a part of the album, and that's from a fellow from Prescott, Arizona. His name was Gail Gardner, and he's considered one of the premier cowboy poets. And one of the places that I went to was the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada, and I was surprised to find that they had a lot of black cowboy stories within their own different mythologies they had put together. So it's very interesting with cowboy music because there's a couple of different eras. For the black cowboys, I wanted to go about it by doing the folk music that would represent black cowboys, because there's another part of cowboy tradition, which is the singing cowboy, which came later. So that's kind of a more Hollywood movie version of the cowboys, and that includes a lot of yodeling, and that includes a lot of really a beautiful guitar style. Because back when I was in Phoenix, I used to see a lot of cowboy poets and performers, so it wasn't strange for me to think about playing cowboy music, but I had never really actively tried it before. But I was really surprised to find it had a lot of the same vocabulary as a lot of bluegrass, as a lot of country and western, even a lot of blues. Like, for example, like Jimmy Rogers has always been a big influence on me. So, oh yeah. And so I wanted to have, I took a lot of Jimmy Rogers vocabulary when putting my songs together for this. So this is a Jimmy Rogers number here, for example. I'll show you just. T for Texas, T for Tennessee, and it's T for Texas, T for Tennessee, T for Thelma, the gal that made a wreck out of me. Ole, ole, ole. But the thing was, I didn't want to do singing cowboy on black cowboys specifically, because when I was reading about the black cowboys, they were more of the working cowboys that came early on the range. So I needed to kind of shift my focus more into vernacular music of the South, because when we think of Western culture, you have to think of the Louisiana Purchase being instantly followed by the Indian Removal Act, followed by the Mexican Revolution, the Mexican-American War, going right into the Civil War, going right into Reconstruction, and then the Industrial Revolution. So the United States didn't go past the Mississippi River until, let's say, like the 1840s was when people were really moving out west in big droves. So you're finding a lot of Southern music translating over freely. That's why a song like Black Woman, even though it's not classified as a cowboy song, Vera Ward Hall being from Livingston, Alabama, and singing a song about going out to Texas, that was something that really intrigued me. And those were sort of how I figured out ways to fill in the story of how to make it black cowboys compared to just being general cowboys. And I filled it also in with some of the old-time cowboy songs to, in a way, because it's called Black Cowboys, you'd assume the characters are black cowboys. And so when you hear a song like Little Joe the Wrangler or Tying Knots in the Devil's Tail with black characters, it automatically just changes the way that you look at the whole story. And so in a way, I wanted to try to make sure it told the story of African American history as well as just told you generally about cowboy songs, because that's not something I could guarantee people even had heard that. But I didn't want to, cowboy songs all have the same melody, and that was a struggle too. Everything is, I'm a jolly cowboy am I, or I'm a sad cowboy am I, oodly. And I wanted to make it historical, but I wanted to make it exciting too, and that was something that was really important. So working with keys as well and structuring some of the songs, that was an essential part of it as well. Like, let's just give you one example of a song from the album. Like Goodbye Old Paint, for example. There's a beautiful field recording of Jess Morris from John Lomax. He recorded it in 1942. And on the interview, he mentions that he learned it from an ex-slave by the name of Charlie Willis on the range. And so, taking the field recording,
one of the things that was distinctive about it's just fiddle and vocal. And so all of the verses have a different melody, and he's just free-flowing the melody through as he's singing it. And I tried to smooth out parts of it, and I also tried to think back in my mind, how might Charlie Willis have sung the number? And I turned it more into a kind of a bluesy, bluegrass yodel or high lonesome tone. Because the original version, it's more like let me think of that. Farewell, fair ladies, I'm a-leaving Cheyenne. Farewell, fair ladies, I'm a-leaving Cheyenne. Goodbye, my little Donny, my pony won't stand. Goodbye, old Payne, I am leaving Cheyenne. So we kind of sing it in that sort of way, and you know, a little rough around the edges than that, you know. But I tried to think of a way to incorporate the melodic pieces of the fiddle that he's playing as well as the vocal style. So I ended up adapting it like such. So he has a fiddle break that goes like this. I just made that into the guitar line and then took a little Jimmy Rogers. Farewell, fair ladies, I'm a-leaving Cheyenne. And I wanted to treat it free-flowing like a ballad, like an a cappella ballad. So it's and it's in 6/8 time, so you can turn that into 12/16 pretty. You could double it up and make it real slow and bluesy. Farewell, fair ladies, I'm a-leaving Cheyenne. Farewell, fair ladies, I'm a-leaving Cheyenne. Goodbye, my little Donny, my pony won't stand. Old Payne, I'm a-leaving Cheyenne. Goodbye, old Payne, I am leaving Cheyenne. So I kind of made it a high lonesome leap instead of it being quite so, almost like he's lobbing the notes out at you, which is a part of cowboy lore as well. They said that no single cowboy had an excellent voice, and they couldn't remember they couldn't hold a tune in a bucket, and they couldn't remember more than 2 verses to save their lives. And so that's the impression people had of cowboy music. And so when you get to guys like John Lomax, they're trying to make an academic study out of this, and people are laughing in his face until he finally goes to Harvard, and George Kitteridge, who worked with Cecil Sharp, validated his work and that it went forward. But when you start finding out that black cowboys are a part of this, all of a sudden his work in Negro folk songs later becomes a natural extension of his work with cowboys. So again, I had to try to explain this in music without disturbing the narrative that's already there, because I'm a big fan of cowboy music and as well as movies, and I didn't want to kick John Wayne in the rear end to try to tell my story, because it would, when you know the history of the West, it's too easy. And one of the things that you find about these black cowboys is that they persevered in spite of all the obstacles, and so they moved forward. So I wanted the record to be like that too. It didn't need to spend its time talking about who was doing them wrong, because I think of a quote from one black cowboy, Bones Hooks. He said, "Any man who could abuse me on the range wasn't man enough to be there long." So he knew that they were going to be gone because there just wasn't time for that, because people were working.
So this kind of mixture where we're bringing art and we're bringing folkloric preservation together, you know, that's something that's just so great to see from my perspective as a person who teaches these kinds of things and such. But you've also done work with the Smithsonian, if I'm correct. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? I mean, that's another sort of branch here.
Oh, absolutely. There are 2 things. The Black Cowboys came out on Smithsonian Folkways, and it's a part of the African American Legacy Series. National Museum of African American History and Culture is partnered with Folkways for this series, and so Black Cowboys is a part of that legacy. So it's in the museum as a part of its collection and everything. So that's one part. Last summer, I got a chance to do a program called Making American Music, where I got to work with some interns. So we got people that were in master's and doctorate level college education. And we ended up with 4 really wonderful, enthusiastic ladies that we worked on building repertoire, performance style, and also because when they built this repertoire, the idea was that they would be doing living demonstrations in the museum. So I kind of put them through the ringer to try to get them to create an engaging enough 15-minute program so that museum goers would stop and listen to them the whole time. And this is something I picked up when I started out busking, because that was how I started before I started doing stages. And so there's a little bit of there are some things that you can do performance-wise that you can draw an audience in with. And then once you've drawn them in, you can tell them a compelling enough story that you can hold them in place for however long you need for your show. For them, it was 15 minutes. But yeah, we extensively, over a 10-week period, we sat down and went over the repertoire that they had that they thought would be good for them. And then we went over to the African American Museum, Smithsonian Folkways, and the Library of Congress, and went into their archives. And each of them found songs that were within the archive collections, developed them, and then we did workshopping sessions to build them up to snuff. And we put about 50 pieces together altogether, collectively with the 4, which we named the First Ladies, because our exhibit was next to the First Ladies exhibit over at the American History Museum with dresses of all of the first ladies throughout time. And so the First Ladies were out there working collectively and individually with their own repertoire. So that ended up being a very beautiful time. It was really wonderful. You can find it on YouTube, Making American Music. We have a lot of info on that.
That's fantastic. And here's to hoping for an actual songbook. Yeah. All right? My personal request. All right. Well, look, as our time winds down, because we do have to move on and such, I'd like to give people the opportunity to ask the question that I forgot to ask. Because I've got a list of questions, and we talked beforehand, and, what is there's got to be something that you want to say, that you want to use your voice and your station to get out there that they need to hear, and that I, need to hear too. This is your chance to just take the mic, and if you want to take us out with that, that's fantastic.
All right. Well,
put you on the spot here a bit.
Well, there are 2 words that I've thought about a lot: historical equity. Alan Lomax, in his years after working in the field recording, he came up with an academic field called choreometrics, which, again, not to get too deep into it, it was a way to analyze the world's music through computers for the first time and create data on that. And the idea for him was, when mass communication was created, it was made to democratize all of our voices. But it ended up that the little transmitters you can buy for $15 are projecting a message with 3 big transmitters that the big corporations are spending millions to make sure that the message they give you is on this little box. So the idea of cultural equity was that we need to have 15 minutes a day for every single culture around the world in the classroom as well as in performance setting. So that's cultural equity. In some ways, cultural equity is turned in on itself in the digital age, where now we have so much access to information. The idea I've put together is historical equity. Take the time to find those sidelined or marginalized cultural and historical artifacts, whatever they might be. I don't try to be too specific on that. Whatever they might be, the artifacts, and give them their 15 minutes in the front of the screen, or get the red flag in the place. I was telling people earlier on when Pete Seeger passed away in 2014, I just came up with an idea, the Year of the Folk Singer in 2014, as a way to tell people, get your stories down while you're here. Get the stories from the elders while they're here. And because the idea was that at the time, the folk music community wasn't sure what to do once Pete was gone, because Pete was always the one making sure the story was told. And so for me, I tried to do my part to say, make sure that the story's told. If you got to sing, I tell people, sing at least one traditional song in your sets, just so that it can happen. And that's kind of what I've done with historical equity, and it's that idea of when you got an idea, a notion, or something that's obscure, just get it out there, put it out there in front of people, not to try to knock somebody down, but as a way to try to illuminate a tapestry of life that we all live in.
Well, I think that certainly happened for us here today. Let's give a round of applause for Dom, please. Dom Flemons. Oh, thank you.
Let's have Dom play one more song for us, all right?
All right. Now, if anybody saw me before, is there any requests since I got just one? I got a lot of instruments. It helps me out. Huh? Banjo? And I heard Henry Thomas, so I think we got it. Survey says quills. All right. Let's see here. But survey says extra accoutrement, but it doesn't take that long. It only takes a little bit of a couple of sly jokes and a few silly things to say to distract everybody for just a minute before voila. All right. That's one of the trickiest things about being a multi-instrumentalist, folks, is multi-instruments, you know? Who would have guessed? Sorry. Charmin' Betsy. Hold on now. Sorry, the advanced technology that I got up to my face here is having a slight malfunction. Okay, we got it now.
Make me one pal on your floor. Oh, make a pallet soft and low. Won't you make it so your man will never know? Oh, make it so your man will never know. Make it so your man will never know. Oh, make of the town. Looking for that bully of the town. I'm looking for that bully can't be found. I'm looking for that bully, lay me down.
All right, everybody, let's hear it for Dom Flemons.
Thanks, everybody.
Good job with the interview, Dave.